Hey folks, in today's Conundrum we will cover the case of Makaja, Big Harpe, and Wily Little Harpe, infamous American murderers, highwaymen, and river pirates operating in the late 18th century. They are considered the earliest documented serial killers in U.S. history. After being loyal to the British Crown during the American Revolution, they turned to a life of crime, robbing and killing settlers in the frontier. They are believed to have taken the lives of 39 people, possibly even 50. As their crimes gained notoriety, vigilante groups sought justice, leading to their eventual capture and execution around the turn of the century. Their savage acts have become part of American folklore, revealing a dark bloodlust behind their actions. Welcome back to Conundrum, where we delve into the minds and history of serial killers. If you like this type of content, please like the video, subscribe if you are not yet subscribed, and ring a notification bell. Stick to the end of the video for more information about ongoing giveaway. Thank you for being here. The early life of the Harpe brothers remains shrouded in mystery and legend. Historians struggle to separate fact from fiction due to limited records from that time. They are believed to have been born to Scottish parents in what is now Orange County, North Carolina. Makaja, possibly born before 1768 as Joshua Harper, and Wily, possibly born before 1770 as William Harper. While they are commonly referred to as brothers, some suggest they may have been first cousins who emigrated from Scotland in the late 1750s or early 1760s. Their fathers, John and William Harper, settled in North Carolina during the early 1760s. The Harpers were Calvinists and loyal to the British Crown. Before the American Revolution, their fathers may have served in Tory militias during the War of the Regulation, a conflict against British colonial officials. When the Revolutionary War began, the Harpes' fathers sought to join the Patriot forces, but were denied due to their earlier connections to British loyalists. This rejection and mistreatment by Patriot neighbors likely fueled the Harpe brothers' feelings of persecution and desire for revenge. Around 1775, the Harpe brothers left North Carolina for Virginia, seeking overseer jobs on a slave plantation. Big Harpe later traveled with two women, Susan and Betty Roberts, and had children with them. Little Harpe married Sarah Sally Rice, the daughter of a Baptist minister. The early years of the Harpe brothers set the stage for their later notorious deeds, leaving a legacy of mystery and violence that would echo through history. During the American Revolutionary War and the American Indian Wars, the Harpe brothers, part of a Tory outlaw gang, engaged in a series of ruthless actions. They joined a predatory loyalist rape gang, terrorizing North Carolina with acts of violence, theft, and murder. Serving as military associators without official support, they survived by looting and robbery. In 1780, they participated as irregular loyalist militia in the Battle of Kings Mountain under British command. Later, they fought in other battles, including those led by Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton's British Legion. Following the British defeat at Yorktown in 1781, the Harpes fled to Tennessee, joining forces with the renegade Chickamauga Cherokee. They launched attacks on frontier settlements, causing havoc and kidnapping several individuals. For nearly a decade, they lived among the Chickamauga before relocating to Powell's Valley, Tennessee. They concealed their Tory past by altering their surname from Harper to Harpe. The brothers' exact whereabouts after 1795 remain unknown, but in 1797, Wily Harpe married Sarah Rice, as recorded in the Knox County marriage records. Their actions during this period left a trail of violence and fear in the early American frontier. During 1797, the Harpe brothers embarked on a reign of terror, leaving a trail of horror and devastation across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Illinois. Infamous for their brutal and sadistic methods, the Harpes later confessed to the killings of at least 39 people, but it is believed that the combined total, including unknown victims, may have exceeded 50. Their crimes were of such extreme nature that it became challenging to fathom the depths of their cruelty. They engaged in heinous acts, including mutilating bodies and killing without any provocation whatsoever. It was reported that they butchered anyone who crossed their path, showing no mercy, not even to innocent babies. The magnitude of their atrocities drew significant attention, and the authorities were determined to put an end to their murderous spree. In April 1799, the governor of Kentucky, James Garrard, took decisive action and issued a reward of $300 for the apprehension and deliverance of the Harpe brothers back to Danville, Kentucky, to face trial for their crimes. However, the Harpes proved to be elusive adversaries, cunningly evading capture time and again. Fleeing northward from Knoxville, they continued their vicious rampage through Kentucky, leaving a trail of death in their wake. The Wilderness Road near the Cumberland Gap witnessed one of their murderous acts as they allegedly killed a peddler named Peyton, seizing his horse and looting his goods. In December of the same year, they brutally murdered 2 travelers from Maryland. Following this, they became the primary suspects in the killing of John Langford, a man traveling from Virginia to Kentucky, whose body was discovered. A local innkeeper provided information to the authorities, leading them on a pursuit to capture the ruthless criminals. The Harpe brothers' capture seemed imminent when they were eventually jailed in the state prison in Danville, Kentucky. However, their dark and sinister cunning prevailed, and they managed to escape, leaving death and destruction in their wake. In an act of vengeance against those who dared to help the authorities, they killed the young son of a man who had assisted in their apprehension. Seeking refuge, they made their way to the notorious river pirate stronghold Cave in Rock on the Ohio River, where they joined forces with the criminal gang led by Samuel Mason. Even among these notorious outlaws, the Harpes' atrocities proved too much to bear, and they were eventually forced to leave the cave by Mason himself. Their murderous spree did not halt there. They continued their killing spree upon their return to eastern Tennessee. As they left a trail of terror and devastation, more victims were discovered, each death seemingly more horrifying than the last. From disemboweling victims and dumping their bodies in rivers to slashing throats and mutilating bodies, they showed no remorse for their actions. In August 1799, the Harpes' malevolence reached its peak when Big Harpe cold-heartedly bashed his own infant daughter's head against a tree, simply because her crying annoyed him. This act would later be the only crime for which he would genuinely express remorse. The brutality continued unabated. When given shelter at the Stegall home in Webster County, they committed one of their most chilling acts. They not only killed an overnight guest named Major William Love, but also slit the throat of Mrs. Moses Stegall's 4-month-old baby boy when he cried. Mrs. Stegall's horrified screams brought about her own demise, as the Harpe brothers murdered her as well. The Harpes' reign of terror seemed relentless, leaving communities in fear and anguish, unsure of when and where the next act of brutality would strike. The $300 reward on each of their heads served as a testament to their notoriety, and their ruthless killings evoked shock and horror among the populace. The Harpe brothers, notorious for their brutal crimes, had distinct physical appearances. Micajah Harpe, also known as Roberts, stood at around 6 feet tall with a robust build, aged approximately 30 or 32. He had a downcast, ill-looking countenance, and short black hair that came down his forehead. His face was full, and he typically wore a striped nankeen coat, dark blue woolen stockings, drab cloth leggings, and trousers. On the other hand, Wiley Harpe, also known as Roberts, had a meager face with short black hair, not as curly as his brothers. Despite appearing older, he was actually younger than Micajah. Like his brother, he had a downcast expression. Wiley typically wore a coat similar to Micajah's, along with a surtout coat over the close-bodied one, dark woolen stockings, and drab cloth leggings. The Harpes' reign of terror lasted until August 24, 1799, when they were finally tracked down and confronted by a posse led by John Liper. Micajah Harpe was shot in the leg and back by Liper, and ultimately subdued with a tomahawk. He confessed to 20 murders before his life came to a gruesome end. As he lay dying, Moses Stegall, a member of the posse, cut off Micajah's head, later spiking it on a pole at a crossroads, creating a grim and lasting reminder of their horrific deeds. Wiley Harpe managed to escape the confrontation and rejoined the Samuel Mason gang at Cave in Rock. 4 years later, he was captured but went unrecognized due to using an alias. Along with another gang member, they claimed the bounty on Samuel Mason, but were quickly arrested for their own crimes. In January 1804, Wiley Harpe and his accomplice Peter Alston were executed by hanging. and their heads were displayed on stakes along the Natchez Trace as a warning to other outlaws. The Harpe women, once freed from the brothers' influence, led relatively ordinary lives. Sally Rice Harpe returned to live with her father in Knoxville, Tennessee, while Susan Wood and Maria Davidson lived in Russellville for some time before moving on. The Harpe brothers' chilling legacy continues to inspire various works of popular culture, from books and plays to television and film productions, ensuring that their dark and terrifying tale remains an enduring part of American folklore. Their gruesome legacy paints a vivid picture of the darkest depths of human malevolence and serves as a chilling reminder of the capacity for cruelty that can lie within the human soul. The Harpe brothers' names have become synonymous with brutality, forever etched into the annals of history as the earliest documented serial killers in the United States. Thank you to all who have stuck with me until the end of the video. All small creators like me have certain goals in mind when we embark on this journey, and reaching 1/4 of that goal is my first significant milestone. Since we all share a common interest in similar topics, my idea is to organize a giveaway for a 1-year Curiosity Stream subscription plan once we reach 250 subscribers. This giveaway will serve as a token of appreciation for your support thus far. I'm genuinely grateful to have you all here with me. Comment down below if you have any recommendations for my future uploads. I am Alex, and this was Conundrum. Stay curious and stay safe. Hey folks, in today's Conundrum we will cover the case of Patrick Wayne Kearney, born on September 24, 1939, who earned infamous monikers such as the Trash Bag Killer and the Freeway Killer. Operating between 1962 and 1977, this American serial killer and necrophile unleashed terror across Southern California, mercilessly ending the lives of at least 21 young men and boys. Kearney, alongside William Bonin and Randy Kraft, forms the trio known as the Freeway Killer. These men shared a chilling similarity in their choice of victims and the timeline of their heinous acts. Their reign of terror cast a dark shadow over California during those troubling years. Welcome back to Conundrum, where we delve into the minds and history of serial killers. If you like this type of content, please subscribe, and put the notifications bell on so you don't miss any of my future uploads. Thank you for being here. Patrick Wayne Kearney was born on September 24, 1939, as the eldest of 3 sons in a middle-class family, providing a relatively stable upbringing. However, his early life was marred by adversity and disturbing inclinations. Due to his frail and sickly nature, Kearney became an easy target for bullies at school, enduring frequent beatings and relentless taunts of being a queer, despite his professed interest in girls. These relentless assaults fueled his seclusion and nurtured sinister fantasies, often involving the graphic act of skinning his personal enemies alive. Furthermore, Kearney developed sexual desires entangled with domination, which escalated to engaging in bestiality by the age of 13. While Kearney was born in East Los Angeles, California, he also resided in Texas for a period. Following a short-lived marriage that ended in divorce, he returned to California and found employment as an engineer at Hughes Aircraft. During his early years in California, Kearney honed his skills as a pickup artist within the gay community. He primarily sought out partners in San Diego and Tijuana, Mexico, leveraging his fluency in Spanish and deep interest in Latin American culture to establish connections. Kearney claimed his first victim was a hitchhiker he picked up and murdered in Orange, California, around 1962. He admitted to perpetrating several more killings, predominantly targeting transients. In 1967, Kearney relocated to Redondo Beach, near Los Angeles, accompanied by his lover, David Hill, cementing their relationship. Patrick Wayne Kearney's murderous activities unfolded with disturbing precision and an escalating level of cruelty. As tensions grew between Kearney and his partner David Hill, Kearney sought solace in long, solitary drives in his Volkswagen Beetle or truck. These drives often served as hunting expeditions, as Kearney would target young male hitchhikers or individuals he met at gay bars. Kearney, a necrophile, adhered to a consistent modus operandi, when it came to both the killings and disposal of the victims' remains. Kearney, aware of his slight build, devised a system of subduing victims that minimized the chances of failure or physical confrontation. Unlike his fellow freeway killers, he did not derive sadistic pleasure from causing pain. Instead, he favored speed and efficiency in his methods. While Kearney later confessed to post-mortem mutilation out of curiosity, such as cutting open the victims' stomachs, he ensured that no physical suffering was inflicted. According to Kearney's recollections, his first murder occurred in the spring of 1962. The victim remains unidentified but was confirmed to be a 19-year-old white male. Kearney convinced the young man to take a ride on his motorcycle to a secluded area outside Indio, California. Once there, Kearney fatally shot him in the head and proceeded to sexually assault the lifeless body. Although it is unclear if the victim's remains were ever discovered, Kearney confessed to this murder as well as two others in 1962. One of these victims was the younger cousin of his initial target, who witnessed the fateful encounter. Kearney's first confirmed and convicted murder took place around Christmas of 1968 in Culver City, a year after he and David Hill had begun living together. The victim, known as George, was enticed into Kearney's vehicle in San Diego before being taken to Kearney's residence. Once inside, George was shot in the head without warning and then dragged to the bathroom, where he was sodomized, skinned, and dismembered in the bathtub using an X-Acto knife. Kearney even extracted the bullet from the victim's head to eliminate any trace of his involvement. The dismembered remains were buried behind Kearney's garage. Afraid of attracting attention due to George's disappearance, Kearney refrained from killing for over a year. To this day, the victim's identity remains unknown, with only his first name recorded. Over time, Kearney refined his techniques, allowing him to carry out his murderous acts more efficiently and frequently. Starting in 1974, Kearney is estimated to have committed murders almost monthly. After picking up victims along freeways or in gay bars, Kearney would shoot them in the temple above the ear with a Derringer Point .22 pistol, while steering the vehicle with his other hand and keeping an eye on the speed to avoid arousing suspicion. Following the killings, he would leave the victims' bodies in a seated position and drive to secluded areas where he would engage in acts of necrophilia. Following these acts, Kearney would often dismember the remains using a hacksaw before disposing of them in various locations, such as canyons, landfills, or along freeways. The victims' bodies were usually concealed in industrial trash bags. In some instances, Kearney left the bodies in the desert, where they could be consumed by scavenging animals. To minimize evidence, he would drain the victim's blood to reduce odor and occasionally wash the body parts to remove dried blood and fingerprints. Kearney also took part in post-mortem beatings of his victims, viewing it as a cathartic exercise that allowed him to vent his suppressed anger and exert a sense of power. Many of the victims bore a resemblance to individuals who had bullied Kearney during his childhood. While Kearney predominantly targeted young men, there were also known cases involving children and adolescents. One of the youngest victims was 5-year-old Ronald Dean Smith, who vanished in Lenox, California, in August 1974. His body was discovered in Riverside County 2 months later. Another victim, 8-year-old Merle Hondo Chance from Venice, disappeared in April 1977 while supposedly riding his bicycle near Kearney's workplace. Kearney confessed to smothering the boy, taking his body home overnight, and later disposing of the remains in the Angeles National Forest. Chance's decomposed remains were found in May 1977. Merle Chance was Kearney's last known victim. On June 16, 1976, Kearney killed 13-year-old Michael Craig McGee from Redondo Beach. Records confirmed that McGee had a history of juvenile delinquency. Kearney claimed to have picked up McGee while he was hitchhiking from Lenox to Torrance. Kearney, perceiving McGee as a potential threat, shot him without warning after the boy openly boasted about his criminal exploits and inquired about burglar alarms in Kearney's home. Kearney suggested that he disposed of McGee's remains, stating, "You aren't going to find him." John Otis LeMay, a 17-year-old, became the victim whose murder ultimately led to Kearney's arrest. On Sunday, March 13, 1977, LeMay informed a neighbor that he was going to Redondo Beach to meet a man named Dave, whom he had encountered at a local gym. This person was, in fact, David Hill, who provided LeMay with Kearney's address. Upon arriving at Kearney's residence, LeMay was invited inside and asked to wait for Hill, who was not present at the time. Without provocation, Kearney impulsively shot LeMay in the back of the head. Kearney then dismembered the corpse and disposed of the remains in the desert. During the peak of his killing spree, Kearney's idiosyncrasies largely went unnoticed. However, Jerry Stevens, a local grocery store owner, observed Kearney's frequent purchases of butcher knives and detected an eerie quietness about him. Kearney's supervisor at Hughes Aircraft described him as a diligent and unassuming worker. The capture and imprisonment of Patrick Wayne Kearney marked the end of his gruesome killing spree. On March 18, 1977, the remains of John Otis LeMay were discovered. Prior to this discovery, the police had already visited Kearney's home during their investigation into LeMay's disappearance, leading them to realize that LeMay had been seen with Kearney and David Hill. Warrants were subsequently issued for the arrest of Kearney and Hill on June 3rd. In an attempt to evade capture, Kearney resigned from his job, and the two fugitives fled to El Paso, Texas. However, the families of Kearney and Hill managed to persuade them to surrender. On July 1, 1977, Kearney turned himself in at the Riverside County Sheriff's Office, accompanied by Hill. David Hill, then 36 years old, was eventually cleared of any involvement in Kearney's crimes and was released. Upon his arrest, Kearney made a chilling confession. Initially, he admitted to 28 murders, but later, he confessed to an additional 7 killings. In order to avoid the death penalty, Kearney agreed to plead guilty. He was charged with 21 counts of murder and, as part of his plea agreement, pleaded guilty to all charges. Consequently, Kearney received 21 life sentences. Although police were convinced that Kearney was responsible for the other 7 murders he had confessed to, they lacked sufficient physical evidence to bring charges against him. As of 2022, Kearney remains incarcerated at California's Mule Creek State Prison, where he will spend the rest of his life. Hey folks, in today's Conundrum, we will cover the case of Gary Leon Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, an American serial killer convicted of 49 murders. He targeted teenage girls and women in Washington state during the 1980s and 1990s. Most of his victims were sex workers and vulnerable women. Ridgway strangled his victims, dumped their bodies in forested areas, and sometimes returned to have sexual intercourse with them. Despite being a suspect since 1982, he was only definitively linked to the murders through DNA profiling in 2001. Ridgway was arrested, spared the death penalty, and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole in exchange for revealing the locations of still missing women. Welcome back to Conundrum, where we delve into the minds and history of serial killers. If you like this type of content, please subscribe, and put the notifications bell on so you don't miss any of my future uploads. Thank you for being here. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah, as the second son of Mary and Thomas Ridgway. His upbringing was troubled, witnessing violent arguments between his domineering mother and father, who often complained about sex workers. Ridgway struggled with bedwetting until the age of 13, and his mother would wash his genitals after each incident. As an adolescent, he harbored conflicting emotions of anger and sexual attraction towards his mother, even fantasizing about killing her. Ridgway faced academic challenges due to dyslexia, repeating a year in high school. At 16, he committed a disturbing act by stabbing a 6-year-old boy, who miraculously survived the attack. In adulthood, Ridgway graduated from Tyee High School in 1969 and married his high school girlfriend, Claudia Craig. Joining the United States Navy, he was deployed to Vietnam and saw combat on a supply ship. During his military service, Ridgway engaged in unprotected sexual encounters with sex workers, resulting in contracting gonorrhea. His marriage to Claudia ended within a year due to infidelity. Described as friendly yet peculiar, Ridgway's subsequent marriages also crumbled due to unfaithfulness. His second wife, Marcia Winslow, accused him of placing her in a chokehold. While embracing religion during his second marriage, Ridgway paradoxically continued soliciting sex workers and desired his partners to engage in public and inappropriate sexual activities, sometimes in the very areas where he would later dispose of his victims' bodies. Despite his religious beliefs, he had an insatiable sexual appetite, demanding frequent sex from his ex-wives and ex-girlfriends, often in public or woodland settings. Ridgway had a conflicted relationship with sex workers, expressing both complaints about their presence in his community and regularly availing himself of their services. At his plea hearing, Ridgway claimed to hate prostitutes and voiced a reluctance to pay for sex. This contradiction between his desires and religious beliefs has been a subject of speculation. Ridgway fathered a son named Matthew with his second wife Marcia in 1975. Gary Ridgway unleashed a reign of terror throughout the 1980s and 1990s in the Seattle and Tacoma regions of Washington. His heinous acts claimed the lives of at least 71 teenage girls and women. Ridgway himself admitted to losing count of his victims. The majority of his gruesome murders took place between 1982 and 1984, and primarily targeted sex workers and runaways whom he lured from the Pacific Highway south. To gain their trust, Ridgway would show the victims a picture of his son, creating a false sense of security. However, once engaged in sexual activity, he would abruptly wrap his forearm around their necks from the front while using the other arm to tightly pull back, strangling them to death. His killing sprees took place in various locations, including his own home, truck, and secluded areas. After the murders, he disposed of the bodies in wooded areas near the Green River, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, and other dump sites across South King County. The Portland, Oregon area also suffered from Ridgway's violent acts, with 2 confirmed victims and 2 additional suspected victims found there. The bodies were often left in clusters, sometimes posed, and typically nude. Shockingly, Ridgway would return to the deceased victims and engage in sexual intercourse with their lifeless bodies. He claimed that engaging in necrophilia reduced his need to seek living victims, ultimately limiting his exposure to being caught. Due to the long delay in discovering the bodies, only skeletal remains were found, leaving 2 victims unidentified. To further confound investigators, Ridgway deliberately contaminated the dump sites with gum, cigarettes, and personal belongings belonging to others. He even transported some victims' remains across state lines into Oregon to obfuscate the authorities. In the early 1980s, the Green River Task Force was established by the King County Sheriff's Office to investigate these gruesome murders. Notable members of the task force, including Robert Keppel and Dave Reichert, sought insights from incarcerated serial killer Ted Bundy regarding the psychology and behavior of the unknown killer. Bundy astutely suggested that the murderer would return to the dump sites to engage in sexual acts with the victims, a theory that proved to be accurate. FBI Special Agent John E. Douglas also played a significant role in the investigation by developing a profile of the suspect. Ridgway's criminal activities first drew attention in 1982 and 2001 when he was arrested on charges related to prostitution. These incidents led authorities to suspect his involvement in the Green River killings. Despite passing a polygraph test in 1984, his actions raised suspicions. In 1987, crucial hair and saliva samples were collected from Ridgway, eventually serving as key evidence in his arrest. Around 1985, Ridgway began a relationship with Judith Mawson, who became his third wife in 1988. Mawson, in a revealing interview, disclosed that when she moved into Ridgway's house, she noticed the absence of carpet, which investigators believed he had used to wrap a body. She also mentioned that Ridgway would often leave early for work, ostensibly for overtime pay. Mawson speculated that he might have utilized those early morning shifts to carry out some of his murders. Astonishingly, she claimed to have had no knowledge of Ridgway's crimes until authorities contacted her in 1987. She staunchly maintained her innocence and believed that her role as his wife had inadvertently saved lives by keeping him content. In 2001, DNA profiling was conducted on the samples collected in 1987, providing the crucial evidence needed for Ridgway's arrest. On November 30, 2001, While at work at the Kenworth truck factory, Ridgway was apprehended by the police. The DNA evidence conclusively linked him to the semen found at the crime scenes, confirming his guilt. The original indictment included 4 victims: Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Ann Christensen. Later, 3 additional victims, Wendy Caulfield, Deborah Bonner, and Deborah Estes, were added to the indictment after microscopic spray paint spheres, unique to a specific brand and composition used at the Kenworth factory, were identified as evidence connecting Ridgway to their deaths. In August 2003, Gary Ridgway, known as the Green River Killer, was moved from a maximum security cell to a minimum medium security facility. News reports indicated that his lawyers were finalizing a plea bargain that would spare him the death penalty in exchange for his confession to several of the Green River murders. On November 5, 2003, Ridgway entered a guilty plea to 48 charges of aggravated first-degree murder as part of the plea bargain. In his statement, Ridgway admitted to killing all of his victims in King County, Washington, and dumping the remains of 2 women near Portland to confuse the police. The plea agreement contained the names of 41 victims, who would not have been part of the case if not for the agreement. King County prosecuting attorney Norm Maleng explained that the deal was made to uncover the truth, acknowledging that Ridgway did not deserve mercy but emphasizing that the resolution was intended to bring closure. On December 18, 2003, Ridgway was sentenced to 48 life sentences without the possibility of parole, with an additional 10 years for each victim for tampering with evidence. In total, he received 48 life sentences, plus an additional life sentence when the remains of his 49th victim were found. Ridgway cooperated with prosecutors, leading them to the remains of 3 victims in 2003. The remains of Pammy Annette Avent, Marie Malvar, and April Buttram were discovered as a result of his information. In November 2005, the skull of one of Ridgway's victims was found by a hiker, and it was later determined to belong to Tracy Winston, leading to Ridgway's 49th life sentence. During his confessions, Ridgway admitted to more confirmed murders than any other American serial killer. Over the course of several months, he confessed to 48 murders, with 42 of them matching the police's list of probable Green River Killer victims. In some of his initial interviews, he claimed responsibility for the deaths of 65 women. Ridgway revealed that he targeted prostitutes because they were easy targets and admitted to having sex with the victims' bodies after killing them. He claimed that burying the later victims helped him resist the urge to commit necrophilia. Ridgway referred to murdering young women as his career. Ridgway was initially placed in solitary confinement at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. However, in 2015, he was transferred to USP Florence High, a high-security federal prison in Colorado. Following public outcry and discussions with Governor Jay Inslee, Ridgway was brought back to Washington to be easily accessible for ongoing murder investigations. He returned to the Washington State Penitentiary in October 2015. Hey folks, in today's Conundrum we will cover the case of Randal Brent Woodfield, also known as the I-5 Killer or the I-5 Bandit, an American serial killer, rapist, kidnapper, robber, and burglar. He gained notoriety for his crimes committed along the Interstate 5 corridor in Washington, Oregon, and California. Woodfield was suspected of multiple sexual assaults and murders, although he was convicted for only 1 murder. However, he has been linked to a total of 18 murders, and is suspected of having killed up to 44 people. Welcome back to Conundrum, where we delve into the minds and history of serial killers. If you like this type of content, please subscribe, and put the notifications bell on so you don't miss any of my future uploads. Thank you for being here. Randal Woodfield was born into an upper-middle-class family in Salem, Oregon, on December 26, 1950. Growing up in Otter Rock, a small town near Newport, he enjoyed popularity and excelled in football at Newport High School. However, his adolescence was marked by sexually dysfunctional behavior, including public exposure. Despite an incident of exposing himself to girls on a bridge, his football coaches protected his reputation. After high school, Woodfield attended Treasure Valley Community College and later transferred to Portland State University, where he played as a wide receiver for the Portland State Vikings. Although he was described as polite and coachable by his football coach, Woodfield had a series of petty run-ins with the law during his college years. Arrests for vandalism, public indecency, and similar offenses marred his record. Despite these setbacks, he was selected by the Green Bay Packers in the 1974 NFL Draft, but failed to secure a spot on the team's final roster. Woodfield then played with the semi-pro Manitowoc Chiefs while working for Oshkosh Truck. Disappointed by his football career's failure, Woodfield returned to Portland in late 1974. In early 1975, a series of knife-wielding assaults on women occurred in the city, with victims being forced into oral sex and robbed. Woodfield's criminal behavior escalated, and he was eventually caught with marked money from an undercover officer. He confessed to the crimes, attributing his actions to poor sexual impulse control linked to steroid use. In April 1975, Woodfield pled guilty to reduced charges of second-degree robbery and received a 10-year prison sentence. However, he was released on parole in July 1979 after serving 4 years. This marked the beginning of a more sinister chapter in his life, with a series of murders and further criminal activities to follow. The murders and subsequent crimes committed by Randal Woodfield marked a dark and violent chapter in his life. The first known murder occurred on October 9, 1980, when Cherie Lynn Ayers, a former classmate and X-ray technician, was brutally raped and murdered in her downtown Portland apartment. Although suspicions pointed to Woodfield, as they had been in correspondence during his previous incarceration, no charges were filed due to a lack of evidence. Just a month later, on Thanksgiving Day, Woodfield arrived at the home of Darcy Renee Fix, intending to assault her. Alongside Douglas Keith Altig, who happened to be present at the time, both Fix and Altig were bound and executed inside the house. The investigation did not yield enough conclusive evidence to link Woodfield to the murders, despite his acquaintance with Fix. After these first murders, Woodfield embarked on a series of robberies that earned him the moniker of the I-5 Bandit. His preferred targets were located along the Interstate 5 corridor, which stretches through multiple states. Wearing disguises, including fake beards, and armed with a gun, Woodfield committed a string of robberies and sexual assaults from December 1980 to January 1981. His victims included waitresses, store clerks, and even young girls whom he subjected to heinous acts of sexual abuse. The crimes escalated in their brutality and violence. Woodfield invaded homes, sexually assaulted victims, and left a trail of terror in his wake. On February 3, 1981, the bodies of Donna Eckert and her 14-year-old daughter were discovered, both shot in the head. Evidence pointed to sexual assault against the young girl as well. Woodfield continued his spree, robbing stores and sexually assaulting victims in different locations, including California and Oregon. The violence reached a climax on Valentine's Day, when Woodfield planned a party at a hotel in Portland. However, no guests showed up, leading him to drive to the home of 18-year-old Julie Wrights. In the early morning hours of February 15th, Woodfield raped and fatally shot Wrights. The scene revealed chilling details of the encounter, such as the unfinished preparation of coffee, indicating the abrupt and tragic end to Wrights' life. These horrifying crimes left communities terrified and law enforcement agencies on high alert. Woodfield's actions demonstrated a cold and calculated disregard for human life, as he continued to escalate his violence and prey upon unsuspecting victims. Randal Woodfield's reign of terror came to an end when law enforcement finally caught up with him. After a months-long investigation and an extensive manhunt, Woodfield was apprehended on March 4, 1981. His arrest was a result of his connection to the string of robberies, sexual assaults, and murders that had plagued the Pacific Northwest. Woodfield faced a long and complex legal process as he was brought to trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming, with witnesses, survivors, and forensic evidence tying him to the heinous crimes he had committed. Although Woodfield vehemently denied his involvement, the weight of the evidence presented a compelling case against him. In June 1981, Woodfield stood trial for the murder of Sherry Hull and the attempted murder of her co-worker, Beth Wilmot. The jury listened to the prosecution's compelling arguments and the heartbreaking testimonies of survivors who had endured the horrors of Woodfield's crimes. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to cast doubt on the evidence and challenge the credibility of witnesses. Ultimately, the jury found Woodfield guilty on multiple charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment plus an additional 90 years for his crimes. In a subsequent trial, he was convicted of sodomy and improper use of a weapon in a sexual assault case, receiving an additional 35 years to his sentence. Throughout the legal proceedings, Woodfield maintained his innocence and never confessed to any of the crimes he was accused of or convicted for. However, the overwhelming evidence and the testimony of survivors left no doubt in the minds of the jury and the public about his guilt. Randal Woodfield's arrest and subsequent trial marked the culmination of a terrifying crime spree that had devastated communities and left many lives shattered. His conviction brought a sense of justice to the victims and their families, providing closure and the hope of healing in the aftermath of his heinous acts. Following his conviction, Randal Woodfield has been serving his sentences at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. In 1983, he was injured during a prison disturbance involving another inmate. In 1987, Woodfield filed a libel lawsuit against author Ann Rule, seeking $12 million in damages. However, the lawsuit was dismissed by the federal court in Oregon in 1988 due to the expiration of the statute of limitations. Over time, the number of victims connected to Woodfield continued to grow. By 1990, he was suspected of being involved in as many as 44 homicides. In 2001 and 2006, DNA testing linked him to 2 additional murders that took place in Oregon between 1980 and 1981. During his incarceration, Woodfield married 3 times but has since divorced twice. He gained some attention for the letters he wrote from prison, which were later compiled and published as the Serial Killer Letters. In one of these letters, he expressed a desire for personal connection and suggested a phone call with a journalist. Woodfield's modus operandi involved targeting thin white women in their 20s, often from middle-class backgrounds. Many of his victims were employees of restaurants and convenience stores located along the Interstate 5 corridor. He would disguise himself with a hoodie, a fake beard, and sometimes used athletic tape across his nose to avoid identification. Woodfield's attacks ranged from random to incited by rejected sexual advances. His crimes were sexually motivated, with the majority of his victims being shot. Hey folks, in today's Conundrum we will cover the case of Ronald Joseph Dominique, the Bayou Strangler, a notorious American serial killer who terrorized Louisiana from 1997 to 2006. His gruesome crimes claimed the lives of 23 men and boys. After a trial on September 23, 2008, Dominique was sentenced to multiple life imprisonments without parole. The FBI recognized his case as the most impactful serial homicide in the country in terms of both body count and duration. Surprisingly, Dominique's arrest went relatively unnoticed beyond the state's media outlets. Welcome back to Conundrum, where we delve into the minds and history of serial killers. If you like this type of content, please subscribe, and put the notifications bell on so you don't miss any of my future uploads. Thank you for being here. Ronald Joseph Dominique, born on January 9, 1964, faced a challenging upbringing in Thibodaux, Louisiana. Growing up in poverty, his parents struggled to make ends meet in a trailer park on the outskirts of town. Despite financial hardships, Dominique managed to graduate from Thibodaux High School in 1983. He pursued higher education at Nicholls State University, studying computer science but eventually dropping out in the mid-1980s. Throughout his school years, Dominique was known for his introverted nature, struggles with weight, and difficulty in social interactions. He faced bullying due to low self-esteem, poor health, and a lack of interest in sports or substance abuse. In a period before leaving school, Dominique discovered his homosexuality and ventured to a local gay bar. Unfortunately, his visits became known to classmates, leading to further harassment. He denied accusations of being gay. In 1985, Ronald Joseph Dominique faced his first offense, being arrested for sexual harassment conducted over the telephone. He paid a fine of $75 as a consequence. With limited education, Dominique struggled to find stable employment and often faced disciplinary issues, leading to difficulties in maintaining jobs. He relied on the support of family members, primarily his mother and older sister, moving between their households to sustain himself. In 1994, Dominique encountered legal trouble again, this time for drunk driving, resulting in a monetary penalty. A significant incident occurred in 1996 when a young man, partially unclothed, escaped from Dominique's sister's residence and accused him of rape and attempted murder. Dominique was arrested and granted bail set at $100,000. However, the prosecution faced challenges in locating the alleged victim and establishing his identity. Eventually, the case was dismissed in November of that year. Another arrest followed on February 10, 2002, when Dominique was accused of assaulting a woman during a Mardi Gras festival in Terrebonne Parish. The altercation stemmed from an incident where the woman had allegedly hit a baby stroller with her car, leading to a confrontation with Dominique. After an apology was given, Dominique unexpectedly struck her in the face. While charged initially, the case was dropped after a reconciliation agreement was reached between Dominique and the woman involved. Being a gay man, Dominique remained unmarried without children. He found solace in frequenting gay bars, often adorning himself in the attire of his favorite singer, Patti LaBelle. Despite his involvement in the local gay community, Dominique faced disdain and struggled to form meaningful relationships. Ronald Joseph Dominique embarked on a chilling spree of calculated and brutal murders, meticulously selecting his victims from a predominantly young male demographic aged 16 to 46. Regardless of sexual orientation, Dominique targeted African-American individuals, encountering them during walks, drives in his pickup truck, or gay bars. Manipulating their vulnerabilities, he enticed them with promises of alcohol, drugs, housing, or group sex. Once he gained their trust, Dominique led them to his trailer, where he subjected them to horrific acts of rape before callously strangling them, silencing their cries forever. Dominique's attention to detail extended to the disposal of the bodies. After his heinous acts, he loaded the lifeless corpses into his truck and dumped them in remote rural areas across 6 neighboring parishes. These carefully chosen locations ensured the victims' remains were concealed and difficult to discover. The chilling series of murders began in July 1997 with the tragic demise of 19-year-old African-American man David Mitchell. Found in a ditch near a wooded area in St. Charles Parish, Mitchell's death was initially ruled as accidental drowning, despite evidence suggesting foul play. Mitchell's father, convinced of his son's murder, highlighted the low water level and the discovery of his trousers lowered to his ankles. Dominique's subsequent confessions and the denial of Mitchell's relatives regarding his alleged involvement in drugs, homosexuality, or financial troubles further fueled suspicion. Dominique's next victims met their tragic fate in St. Charles Parish. In December 1997, he strangled 20-year-old Gary Pierre, who had recently faced drug trafficking charges. Pierre's body, fully clothed with no signs of physical trauma or drugs, perplexed investigators. The pattern continued on July 31, 1998, when Dominique took the life of 38-year-old Larry Ranson, a drug-addicted vagrant. Ranson became the first victim subjected to Dominique's sadistic bondage. In October 1998, Dominique encountered 27-year-old Oliver LeBanks in Metairie. LeBanks, a drug-addicted individual, offered sexual services in exchange for money. Dominique engaged in sexual acts before violently beating and strangling him. LeBanks' body was discarded on the outskirts of Metairie, with forensic evidence linking Dominique to the crime. Family and friends confirmed LeBanks' recent descent into a vagrant lifestyle following his job loss due to drug use. During the same month, Dominique lured 16-year-old Joseph Brown into his truck in Kenner under the pretense of selling crack cocaine. However, instead of a transaction, Dominique subjected Brown to brutal beatings and ultimately strangled him with a plastic bag. A month later, 18-year-old Bruce Williams suffered a similar fate under comparable circumstances. In May 1999, Dominique encountered 21-year-old Manuel Reed in Kearney, whom he deceived into believing a drug deal was imminent. Instead, Reed experienced rape and strangulation, with his corpse later found in a dumpster. Continuing his reign of terror, Dominique claimed the life of 21-year-old Angel Magia, a hobo with a history of drug possession convictions. After attempting to dispose of Magia's body in a full dumpster, Dominique left it discarded on the street. Autopsy findings revealed signs of prior binding. The investigation established connections between Magia, Brown, and Pierre, highlighting their proximity and association. In late August, Dominique met 34-year-old Mitchell Johnson, offering him drugs in exchange for sexual favors. Dominique led Johnson to a forest outside Metairie, where he subjected him to rape, bondage, and strangulation. Johnson's naked body was discovered shortly after. January 2000 witnessed another victim falling prey to Dominique's wickedness. He claimed the life of 23-year-old Michael Vincent in Lafourche Parish. In October of the same year, Dominique became closely associated with 20-year-old Kenneth Randolph Jr., a convicted child molester residing in the same trailer park. Luring Randolph into his trailer under false pretenses, Dominique launched a brutal attack, resulting in Randolph's tragic murder. His body was later found in a field. In October 2004, Dominique lured 46-year-old Larry Matthews to his house, where Matthews overdosed and lost consciousness. Taking advantage of the situation, Dominique raped and strangled him, disposing of the body miles away. Dominique's next victim, 21-year-old Michael Barnett, marked a significant change as he became the first white victim. Barnett's lifeless body was discovered later that month. Dominique continued his spree in early 2005, murdering 22-year-old Leon Lirette and 31-year-old August Watkins. Lirette had previous connections to two other victims, and Watkins was enticed by the promise of an overnight stay. Both were subjected to rape and ultimately strangled by Dominique. The killings persisted with the murders of Kurt Cunningham, Alonzo Hogan, and Wayne Smith, who were lured under false pretenses and subjected to Dominique's sadistic desires. Hogan and Smith, unlike previous victims, had no criminal records or drug involvement. In September 2005, Dominique targeted 40-year-old Chris DeVille, who was hitchhiking after Hurricane Katrina. Dominique discarded DeVille's body in a reed field, leaving only skeletal remains that were identified by relatives through personal belongings. In late November, Dominique struck again, claiming the life of 21-year-old Nicholas Pellegrin. Investigations revealed Pellegrin's association with local drug dealers, leading to initial misconceptions about the motive behind his death. Dominique's last confirmed victim was 27-year-old Christopher Sutterfield, whom he had been dating. During a date in Iberville Parish, Dominique struck Sutterfield on the head, causing his death. Witnesses recalled seeing Sutterfield with a man driving a black SUV but could not provide a detailed description. In November 2006, Ricky Wallace reported an encounter with Dominique, where he was lured to his trailer under the pretense of drugs and sexual activities. Dominique's attempt to involve Wallace in bondage was refused, and Wallace eventually left. Despite initial doubts due to Wallace's history of drug addiction and dishonesty, Dominique was questioned and his blood sample was taken. DNA testing confirmed Dominique's connection to the murders, matching his profile to semen traces found on the bodies of Oliver LeBancs and Manuel Reed. On December 1, 2006, Dominique was arrested at a homeless shelter. He acknowledged that he had anticipated his capture and had moved out of his sister's house to avoid inconveniencing her. During his time at the police station, Dominique expressed a willingness to cooperate, providing detailed confessions to 23 murders, known only to the investigating officers. Although charges were brought against him, Dominique refused to admit guilt, claiming that most victims willingly participated in bondage and other activities for financial gain. He asserted that he only harmed those who posed a potential threat as witnesses. Dominique attributed his motive to a desire to eliminate witnesses and avoid another prison sentence, stating that his 1996 arrest for rape had profoundly affected him and led to negative emotional states and signs of mental disorder. Following a plea bargain, Dominique was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 8 life imprisonment terms without the possibility of parole on September 24, 2008. The case has gained media attention, with documentary films and TV shows exploring the events. These include the documentary film Bayou Blue in 2011, an episode of Killer Profile in 2013, a recreation of the killings in an episode of Killers, Behind the Myth in 2015, and an episode dedicated to the case in the Oxygen Network series Mark of a Killer in 2022. Additionally, the A&E TV series First Blood featured an episode that delved into Ronald's childhood and his murderous spree in 2022. Ronald Joseph Dominique's reign of terror left a trail of devastation and shattered lives. His meticulous selection of victims, manipulation, and sadistic acts of violence marked him as a serial killer of the utmost depravity. The efforts of law enforcement eventually led to his capture and the hope of justice for lives lost. Thank you to all who have stuck with me until the end of the video. All small creators like me have certain goals in mind when we embark on this journey, and reaching 1/4 of that goal is my first significant milestone. Since we all share a common interest in similar topics, my idea is to organize a giveaway for a 1-year Curiosity Stream subscription plan once we reach 250 subscribers. This giveaway will serve as a token of appreciation for your support thus far. I'm genuinely grateful to have you all here with me. Comment down below if you have any recommendations for my future uploads. I am Alex, and this was Conundrum. Stay curious and stay safe.